Welcome back to Senate Education, Wednesday, January 31st, 3:55. Our last bit of business continues on the literacy front. Senators will recall that Secretary Boucher was with the committee last week over Zoom, going through the agency's bill, which now will likely be a committee bill or attached to Senator Hewlett's work. And you had a number of different recommendations, and those are the recommendations that we are about to review and hear about.
Excellent.
And why don't you start going through them while Morgan goes and picks it up?
Awesome. Thank you for the record, Ted Fisher from my Agency of Education. I'm the agency's Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs, and I'm sort of deputizing for Interim Secretary Boucher, who has some family things going on. So we appreciate your patience with us swapping out some witnesses here. And also, I just want to firstly say that we greatly appreciate the committee's interest in this topic, and we've been really appreciating all of the conversation and the multiple bills that you're considering, and your commitment to making meaningful strides this year and improving literacy outcomes. Appreciate you introducing this bill. As I think you heard last week from the Secretary and some of my colleagues, some additional work and review has occurred in the agency over the last several months, and as we reviewed the final draft of our policy recommendation for the transparent, we had some changes we wanted to make. So my goal today is just to walk through those changes. I know Morgan will be back rapidly with the language, but I thought I would just maybe do wave tops and then we can dive in as you have a chance to look at it in front of you. So really today we're only bringing feedback on 3 sections. No feedback on the findings. We agree those are all good. We did want to make what I will characterize as some adjustments to section 2, which is the mandatory completion of literacy modules. Some tweaks to allow the AOE and educators more flexibility to fully achieve implementation of the training. And there's one pretty consequential change. Some of these are language changes. Some of these are more consequential changes, and I'll try to signpost those where they are. In this section, there's one consequential change. At one point during my editing process, everything was underlined, because if you look at your bill, you have all new, your usual underlined process that Beth has given you for an all new section of law. And it was just underlined in bold and italics. And so I just stopped because I realized all the sections we're proposing to change are all new sections that you have under consideration in this bill. So with the committee's forgiveness, and you'll see that what I'm talking about in a second, when you get the paper copies, I have bolded and italicized strike throughs and additions, but I've removed all the underlining, just I think to aid readability. But this is all still new sections of law, but we've only marked, visually indicated what we're proposing to change from what is currently in the bill.
It just takes back. So what was, you all contacted me this summer, put the bill in. What sort of transpired between then and now around just general changes and things that you want?
Yeah, so some of it, one of the other sections I'll get to in a second, is a pretty big, I think we were hoping to do something consequential to rulemaking later in section 4 and section 3, and we thought we were going to do it the right way, and we made essentially an error of trying to be expeditious to get this in for the drafting deadline, and it was in a way that wasn't going to work. So that is partially an error, and partially we actually think what we've come up with now is just better. This first section is just as we've had a chance to look at the final legislative language from our proposal through legislative council, and we have a couple of tweaks. So we're proposing in section A of subsection A of section 2 to actually, while you're still waiting for the copies, one of the things that we really struggled to do this year, and as a lesson learned for me in terms of our internal policy development, is that we didn't do a good job of identifying effective dates. And the devil is really in the details for us on effective dates or deadlines. And so in a lot of cases, Beth, and I really have to appreciate her, she just used her best judgment, because in some cases, what we provided to her didn't have an effective date, so she did a good job of trying to map it. But in most cases, we're asking for more time, and it's a little awkward for me to sit here and say, we're asking for more time at the same time as we're saying we want to move quickly. But with some of these instances where there are review processes, and particularly when you get into questions of rulemaking, there just needs to be a timeline. And one of the constructs in terms of how we do rulemaking, which is I think our most consequential change, and at this point I'm kind of vamping for more to get back, but one of our most consequential changes is literally because we think it would be more efficient to do it the way we're proposing to you today and quicker than if we went through a more protracted rulemaking process.
Sorry to interrupt. Are we talking about 204?
We're talking about 281.
280?
So section 2 is a mandatory completion of literacy modules. Essentially what this requires is requires Vermont educators to complete some professional learning on literacy. When we originally wrote this section, the agency has contracted for and through other previous literacy work has contracted for and developed literacy modules. So the thought initially in this was, let's make sure everyone goes and does this, so that all educators have a common baseline. We are doing two things to this section. One is we're suggesting that we kick out the requirement 1 year. So instead of January 1 of 25, which will be about 6 months after bill passage, we're going to require January 1 of 26. So you're talking an academic year and a half for all educators to come into compliance with this. So I'm at the bottom of page 1. So you have a date change in the first line, sub A. You have a language tweak currently to professionally licensed Vermont educators. And then on the last line of that page, you have, I'm just going to read, program of professional learning on evidence-based literacy instruction developed and offered. And then we proposed adding or approved by the Vermont Agency of Education. And this is an important change, which is that what we don't want to do is make educators who might be very skilled and undertaking a lot of professional learning on literacy to do more professional learning than have to. So if you as an educator have completed professional learning on literacy, you have the opportunity to go to the AOE, to our licensing folks, and say, does what I've already done meet the requirement? And we can then go ahead. But will give us some flexibility. They'll also give the educators some flexibility to meet that requirement. So that's an important change that we think is very important. And you will see this construct of developed and offered or approved by the Vermont Agency of Education a couple of times in this section. So if you flip the page and look at subsection, you'll see the same. And you'll note that new licensed educators employed in Vermont will have completed this, and then we just say within, instead of within, we suggest by the end of. In sub C, we have a small addition to Vermont public and approved independent schools who employ professionally licensed Vermont educators. This is a nod to independent schools, many of whom do employ professionally licensed Vermont educators. It's important to be clear that if you're an independent school who's employing a licensed Vermont educator, you need to meet this requirement as well. And then we have added a section or a line to the end of sub C to say that the agency shall provide a format for record keeping, including the use of the state licensing system as appropriate. I have some educators and folks from the NEA in the room who may have direct experience. I have some direct experience with the educator licensing system, which is quite antiquated, and the AOE is in the process of updating. We may be able to add this into the system for a future educator licensing system, which will allow us to maybe, automate some of that record keeping. So that's just there to essentially flag that there. Educators shall provide evidence of required literacy professional learning upon completion of the educator's license renewal, and that is just a nod to the fact that we're not requiring a specific program that AOE has developed, but there's the option for educators who may have done a different type of professional learning that is acceptable to the agency to provide that evidence. So that's a conforming change, but it is like a little bit of significant language there. And then we are proposing to add sub E by September of this year. We will develop and distribute a list of literacy professional learning requirements specific to each licensing endorsement. So this is going to give some more information to educators about sort of what might help them meet this requirement. So that's section 2. Let me just pause there for questions, comments.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. So you foresee that every licensing endorsement will have a literacy component?
The goal is to have all educators,
Right.
and I don't think this is changing that, but I think it does recognize that we have some very highly skilled educators who are highly skilled in literacy by dint of their endorsement, or perhaps not, but it is an acknowledgement of that. But yes, every Vermont goal is still that every Vermont educator has a baseline, I guess.
And you think it's realistic for this work to be done by September?
I believe so. That's what my understanding is from our licensing folks, that this was one of their recommendations.
Just seem ambitious.
I'm happy to double check if you'd like me to.
Section 3.
Section 3. Okay, so this is where I'm going to talk very briefly, and then I'm actually going to skip to section 4 for reasons that become apparent. So as I mentioned earlier, as we were going through the process, we wanted to ensure the goal of sections 3 and sections 4 in our original work was to make sure that we are updating the educator prep program regulations to ensure that our educator prep programs in Vermont are adequately teaching literacy, and making sure that every educator who graduates from Vermont educator preparation program has a baseline grounding in evidence-based literacy instruction and comes into the system with that sort of understanding.
And that report came out of Act 28, correct? And that is how we've identified, and I think Senator Kulik, you asked a question when the new chancellor was here, state colleges, why the state colleges were using a method that I think a whole language method or something, teaching literacy.
Yeah.
So then what happens now? I mean,
So-
counselor's coming back in to have this conversation with us. She's really interested in literacy. But
So let
what's the
me talk about
agency,
the-
one second,
I'm
what's
sorry.
the agency's role in this now in terms of enforcement and follow through?
Awesome. So here's where the oopsie is. The original version of this bill had all of the educator licensing regulations being transferred from the Standards Board for Professional Education educators to the agency, which was not the intent. The intent originally, the original thinking on AIA's part was we'd like to take over regulation of just what we call the ROPA rules, or the educator preparation rules, because we don't use ROPA in statute. So we wanted to take over just that section. So there's a small problem, which is that there is one series of rules that the Standards Board, or I'm going to just use the term BSBE, ably stewards, and they're very efficient at it. They have a good process. The AAB supports them. Some of the people who support the state board. However, their educator preparation rules are not. It's not a separate rule series. It's not very contiguous. It's kind of mingled within the broader set of rules. So we did not want to change other educator licensing requirements or rulemaking authority. And so the way this originally was a larger shift than we discussed ways to essentially ask you to direct us to take over that educator prep rulemaking, which would probably have required you to direct the Standards Board to update their rules at the same time as, hey, we established a new rule series. So that we could tease them apart. Rulemaking is a complex process, even when it's done quickly and ably. And so what we kind of realized as we were preparing for testimony is we would be doing that for a year or 2 years instead of moving quickly on this. So what we're bringing to you today, this is where it would be helpful to go to the last page, page 3. You will notice that section 4, we'd like to just strike. So that was the section of the bill that transferred the rulemaking authority from the standards board to the so we are going to move away from the idea of rulemaking and just work with the standards board to bring our requirements through their rulemaking process. So jumping back now to page 2, the edits to this section are basically as follows. Instead of having AOE conduct a review of the results-oriented program approval, ROPA program to strengthen educator preparation programs, which is what the teaching of evidence-based literacy practices, which is what the original language says. We have an honor before July 1 of 25. The Agency of Education shall submit recommendations to the Standards Board for Professional Educators on how to strengthen educator preparation programs, teaching of evidence-based literacy practices. The agency shall also simultaneously communicate its recommendations to Vermont's educator preparations programs. That second sentence, so the goal is we're going to do a review and we're going to make the recommendations to the standards board. That last sentence is important, but I'm going to come back to it. If we jump to sub B, you will see that instead of requiring a certification of compliance, which was what sub B originally required, we have an honor before July 1 of 26. The VSBP shall consider and as appropriate update educator preparation requirements in Rule Series 500. So that would mean that updates made based on the agency's recommendations would be ready for the fall of the school year of the fall of 26. We're striking sub C because we don't need to adopt rules if the rulemaking construct isn't changing. And then we have as part of its review under subsection A of this section, the agency shall recommend to the standards board whether or not additional mandatory examination is needed to assess candidates for educator licensure skills in mathematics and English language arts fundamentals beyond the current requirements of Rule Series 500. So we had originally that we would develop an additional examination. Instead, what we're going to be doing is reviewing the current praxis examinations required under the standards board's rules to determine whether they are sufficient to judge literacy and numeracy. So that's hope we will see, make a recommendation to the board. The board has the authority to require an update, so it will kind of keep us in the same playing field. Right now, all of the praxis examinations are in rule and not in statute, so it would be kind of awkward if you guys were requiring one, not the other. So we are proposing to use the current process, basically. If you'll permit me, Mr. Chair, I just want to come back to A, to that last sentence. We are asking that you require us to simultaneously communicate our recommendations to the programs in order that they have essentially an additional time while rulemaking is ongoing to start doing the work. It's our hope that, a lot of them have really expressed a lot of interest in partnering with us on this. It's our hope that if we communicate our recommendations to them, they might start making some changes. Or looking at their programs to see where recommendations might be helpful on a voluntary basis as the rulemaking process is ongoing. So that's an important key thing we'd like to see. So some surgery. We will make sure that Beth has this language as well. Appreciate you buckling up and riding with me on that.
Wow. I need to read this one. I'm a little more
Yeah,
lucid
I
at
think
a
it's-
different time of day,
Yeah,
4:15 after 6-7 hours testimony.
but this is exactly what we asked for, and it's a
Yeah.
great summary and review and points that the secretary put forward last week. Very, very helpful.
Appreciate it.
You could do all
We can do all that, yeah. It seems like our director of educator licensing is already starting to do it based on how furiously he was typing earlier.
Senator
He might
Lewis.
see that.
So I'm going to backtrack to earlier testimony for NEA colleague, Mr. Bannon. So the caution was, I think the caution might have actually came from the earlier bill sponsor as well, different topic, was complications of teaching one method. And I'm just cautious about falling into that same trap. I don't know these modules. I've never seen one, never taken one, but being that there's one set of modules, is there a danger in in following that path with this particular topic.
This might not be your area.
Well,
And
I'll
just
just,
to-
well,
completely
I was
fine.
about to say, and I will answer the question.
As long as.
Colleagues much smarter than I have. Than I am, are attentive to this in terms of developing the modules. We aren't, and you will probably hear from others who will suggest that you adopt a certain standard or a certain program. And that's not what AOE is doing, that's not what AOE is asking, and that's not what our literacy modules do. We are also leaving this language gives more space for that. We have the option to, in the future, update those modules or update our requirements and courses as we get more information or as the science updates or things like that. You also have the opportunity, if it meets AOE's standards for rigor and evidence-based, if you've taken another professional learning course, that's fine.
I acknowledge that, but that stood out. That's a good thing. Just, here we're teaching teachers. And again, it's not my area of expertise either, but, I just want confidence, the fact that if we're mandating modules, if I got, if everybody puts their hand up that says, yep, this is the path we're going, because it sounds like there's sensitivity about previous endeavors that didn't have the intended results.
I appreciate your sensitivity to that because, as we know, amending statute can sometimes be a lengthy process. So by not having it be in statute and have it be referenced, it gives us the opportunity to be flexible as things develop.
And before you jump in, Senator Gulick, we've asked the agency for a module. Show us. Can you follow up with that? We've asked a couple of times. It'd be great for us to throw it up on the screen and have a look at it with somebody taking us through how a teacher will learn it. And Morgan, will you make that happen next week? That would be great. Senator Gulick.
The only other thing I wanted to say was, I said that 8 times today. The only other thing I have to say, this is really the last thing. In response to what you just referenced, which was Mr. Bannon's testimony, when I look back at the edits that were sent to me on this bill,
Which bill?
204.
Yep.
Around phonetic instruction, actually, that is still the focus. And so this is coming from Justin Carolus, and her focus is still very heavy on phonics and phonetic awareness. Phonetic awareness is A, B is letter naming, letter sound correspondence, real and non-word reading. These are all around phonics. So I just want to say that this is her recommendation. So.
Okay. Yeah. And like you mentioned to me, Senator Gulick's gonna have some time with us tomorrow. If it feels good for us to start to pull apart your bill and not pull apart, but edit, write up, just mark up a little bit, stage 1. Senator Weeks, do you ever?
No,
That's just
no, it's just a gesture.
long day, a lot of stuff.
Thank
I
you
need
for
to end
reminding
the
me.
committee there. Thank you. Morgan, you can take us off. Thank you, committee. Thanks